So the act of immigration is at its heart an act of hope. Hope for a better, for a freer, for a more prosperous life, both for oneself and for one's family. It was hope for lives free from Herod's persecution and violence that caused Mary, Joseph, and Jesus to flee to Egypt shortly after Jesus' birth. It was hope for lives free to practice their faith openly that brought the Pilgrims, our religious forebears, to the shores of Massachusetts in 1620. And while it is not politically expedient to say as much, it is hope for safer, more prosperous lives that even today continues to bring families to the borders of these United States. Immigration is an act of hope, hope for a better, freer, and more prosperous life. And that is why the decision that Ruth makes in today's story, the decision to follow her mother-in-law Naomi into the country of Judah, that is why Ruth's decision is so very surprising to us. I noted all your faces while we were reading. You were all very surprised when she made this decision. It is not your usual hope-filled story of immigration. So just to summarize all that took place in our rather long reading, a great famine strikes the nation of Judah. Naomi, her husband, and her 2 sons seek refuge in the nearby country of Moab. Naomi's husband dies, and she is left with her 2 sons. Her 2 sons come of age and get married to Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And this is an important side note. You all presumably know the talk show host turned media magnate Oprah Winfrey. Her real name, her given name, the name that appears on her birth certificate is in fact Orpah. But what happened was that as she was growing up, people kept misreading, misspelling, and mispronouncing it as Oprah until eventually it stuck, and Oprah she became. In any case, back in the book of Ruth, tragedy strikes again for this family, and both of Naomi's sons die as well. Again, as with her husband, we're not told why, but Naomi, Orpah, not Oprah, and Ruth are now all widows. And being a widow in the ancient Near East wasn't just hard, it was utterly devastating. A woman's security, her livelihood, and her very place in society was tied completely to the men in her life. First her father, then her husband, and then her sons. Without them, a woman had no income or protection. She was left utterly exposed and vulnerable to poverty, isolation, and exploitation. So widows like these 3 women didn't just have their loved ones to grieve, they grieved also the loss of everything that had made their lives stable and secure. And so it is in the midst of this profound grief that word gets to Naomi that the famine in Judah has ended. So the 3 women decide to pack up and seek their fortunes in Naomi's homeland. Somewhere along the way, though, before they get to the border of Judah, Naomi turns to Orpah and Ruth, and she encourages them to go back. They were both young. They could return to their father's homes in Moab and be supported there until they were able to find new husbands for themselves. If you come with me, Naomi warns them, your life is sure to be worse off, less free, less prosperous. And Naomi isn't just being dramatic. As we continue to read through the book of Ruth over the next few weeks, we will hear several ominous passages that suggest that Judah was a place unwelcoming toward foreigners, and that by virtue of there being Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah would be at real risk for violence. So Orpah listens to Naomi. She recognizes that she is speaking truly, kisses her on the cheek, and then she does an about-face back into Moab. But Ruth's reaction is a little different than Orpah's. In fact, it is the exact opposite. Listen to how Ruth responds to Naomi one more time in what is the second most popular Bible reading for weddings after the Apostle Paul's love is patient, love is kind, that number from 1 Corinthians. Here's what she says. She says, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. So Naomi has promised Ruth nothing but hardship, and yet Ruth binds her life to Naomi's all the same. She vows to follow her into Judah, come what may. So this is not the usual story of immigration. There is no hope for a better, freer, more prosperous life for Ruth in Judah. So why does she make this seemingly disastrous decision? That is the question at the heart of today's story. And for my part, I can't help but think that Ruth's decision to continue on with Naomi has everything to do with Naomi's actions. Naomi was headed back to Judah at an advanced age, knowing full well that she had been gone so long that she had no family to return to. She had no male relations that she could expect to support her and keep her safe. And as non-traditional as a three-woman household would have been in the ancient Near East, Naomi would have been far better off with Orpah and Ruth by her side. Economically and socially, of course, but also emotionally. This woman had been through the ringer, lost her husband and sons, and who wouldn't want some company and support? But Naomi also knew how much harder life would be for Orpah and Ruth if they followed her into Judah. She knew the risks, the prejudice they would face as foreigners, the dangers they would encounter as Moabite women. Naomi understood that their lives would be far better off if they stayed behind in Moab. And so, in a beautiful act of self-sacrificial love, Naomi puts their needs before her own. She encourages them to turn back, to find new lives, find new husbands, and a measure of security back in Moab and their homeland. She releases them to choose a better path, even though it meant walking her own road alone. And that simple act, that stunning, selfless act of love, apparently had a profound effect on Ruth, because not only does Ruth choose to continue on with Naomi, but, and I don't know if you picked up this on the reading, but she, on the spot, converts to Naomi's religion. She says, your God will be my God. And she does that not because she finds its doctrines super compelling. No, what she's really doing is converting to Naomi's kind of love. Ruth sees in Naomi a love that is more than human, a love that is self-sacrificing, other-centered, and completely contrary to self-interest. In other words, she sees in Naomi's actions a glimpse of something extraordinary, a reflection of God's love at work in the world. And Ruth is so moved by her example that she lets that love change her. She lets that love take root in her life, reshape her priorities, and redefine her future. She lets it begin to live and work and grow in her. And how do we know that to be true? We know that true not only because of what happens in later chapters of Ruth, but also because of what happens in the very first chapter of the New Testament. In Matthew chapter 1, the gospel writer lists for us in rather excruciating detail the family tree of Jesus. And you know who we find in that list? Ruth. We find Ruth. 30 generations after Ruth sees and responds to Naomi's self-sacrificing love, her great-great-great-great-great-grandson was born to embody and carry that self-same love. Which is to say that love had become a family legacy that Ruth passed on to her children, and they theirs. But what I really want to point out this morning is how at odds Ruth's conversion story is with the way that most of us assume that change actually happens in people. Because most of us believe somewhere down deep in our bones that people change when they are finally confronted with the right argument said loudly enough. We believe if we can just muster enough facts and say them with enough force and conviction and expose someone's wrongness thoroughly enough, then eventually they will get on board and start thinking and acting like us. Saying it out loud makes it sound a little bit absurd, but deep down in our guts, that is what most of us believe, even if we've never thought about it before. It's kind of like this. We think that if we're just loud enough, if we splash enough, if we roil the water enough, then change will come, right? Surely the water is going to be changed by all that action, all that noise. And for that reason, the people we tend to look up to are the people making the biggest noise, the Colberts, the AOCs, the Rachel Maddows of the world. Always ready with the sharpest tweets, the clearest denunciations, the most devastating takedowns of their opponents. I don't say that to judge. I consider Stephen Colbert to be my patron saint. And I also believe that naming injustice in our world matters, right? There are whole books of the Bible dedicated explicitly to that purpose. But the fact remains that our loud condemnations do not change people. They may expose what is wrong, they may name what is harmful, but they cannot make a person's heart new. Nobody in the history of the world has ever been shamed, belittled, and humiliated into being a more loving person. And because we expect to be able to yell and condemn our way to change, we tend to overlook people like Naomi. People not making much noise, but doing their best to actually love their neighbors, including and especially those neighbors with whom they disagree. They just go gently through the world and have an outsized impact on the people around them. This vase is bubbly. A lot of noise is made. A lot of splashing around happened. But the water is entirely unchanged. This vase, not a splash. Just barely a trickle was made, and the water is completely transformed. If you want to change the people around you, it's gentle love like Naomi's, not loud condemnations, that's going to do the trick. And that is something that I know to be true on a deeply personal level as well. So as some of you have certainly heard me say over the years, by quirk of my religious education growing up, I became in my teens, which is just a couple years ago. But in my teens, I was a fundamentalist Christian and a biblical literalist, even though my immediate family did not hold those views at all. But I somehow managed to go off to college convinced of the infallibility of the Bible to the extent that I was actually skeptical of evolution. This is 100% embarrassing to me now, but it's also 100% true. And as you may know, when you're filling out those college enrollment forms, you get to specify what religion you are. And they didn't have a checkbox for exactly what I was, so I just checked Protestant. And because I checked that box, on my first week on campus, I got a voicemail from the university chaplain offering to take me out to coffee. We arranged a meet and greet at the campus coffee shop. And there I encountered for the very first time the short and unassuming visage of the Reverend Kathleen Buckley. Over coffee, she told me that she was starting up a new Protestant worship service on Sunday afternoon. Would I like to be a part? Sounds cool, I said. Sign me up. And so the next Sunday at 5 p.m., I attended a quaint little service with a handful of students. And after that service, every student in attendance got invited to be a part of a leadership team to help make this new thing take off. Eager to get involved in student life, again, I said, sounds cool, sign me up. And it was at the first leadership meeting that I discovered, much to my shock and my abject horror, that Kathleen was an open and out lesbian, and she lived with her partner of many years. Now, good fundamentalist Christian that I was quick to schedule a one-on-one with her after that to let her know with the hubris that only an 18-year-old boy could muster, but to let her know exactly how damned to the hellfire she was. And God bless her. God bless Kathleen. At that meeting, she just kind of nodded along. She just listened, and then she finally said, well, that's not a reason that you shouldn't be part of our group. It would be good to have your voice on our leadership team. And clearly, I couldn't argue my self-evident importance to this group of apostates, leading them back to the path of righteousness and what have you. So I stayed on. And I'd love to be able to up here tell you that my transformation was quick, that I came around quickly, but I didn't. And for the better part of 2 years, I was a bit of a thorn in that woman's side. The idea of a book study came up, and I suggested the Left Behind series. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a fiction series about what happened to the people left behind after the rapture. That was my suggestion for our book study. Again, she nodded politely, and somehow we landed on a different book. But behind that she kept on setting a place for me at the table. And that is the story of how I, a rabid Christian fundamentalist, joined the leadership team of what became St. Lawrence University's first ever progressive Christian community, even though I disagreed with everything that it stood for. Now, maybe you have noticed this is not a fundamentalist congregation. Maybe you have noticed that there are rainbow flags all over this church and all over our branding. And it would be easy to say that I eventually changed my mind, that I was transformed because I grew up, because I saw the world, because I was finally ready. But that's not what happened. What happened was that Kathleen never once shouted me down. She never out-argued or out-logicked me. She never even tried. But much like Naomi, she just kept extending a love that I had not earned and I could not explain. A self-sacrificing love that absorbed all the vitriol and nonsense that I kept on spewing her way. And it wasn't only Kathleen, it was the whole little community she built, a handful of people who had every reason to show me the door and instead kept a place at the table for me week after week. Until one day I looked up and I discovered I had become the very thing that I had once stood in that same office and condemned. And here's the thing I want to leave you with. I am not special. There is nothing unique about this story. It is simply how it works. It is how it has always worked. Not through the people that make the most noise, not through the ones with the sharpest argument, not with the ones with the loudest voices in the room, but through quiet, stubborn, self-sacrificing, self-giving love like this. That is how a heart changes. That is how a person changes. And that, my friends, is how the world changes. In Jesus' name, may it be so. Amen.